something has changed, and now the entire world is responding. He started with nothing. No allies, no map, no rules. Everything he has now, he took. This is Greek mythology from chaos to the heroes. Chapter 1.
Good evening, and welcome back. Tonight, we dive into the fascinating world of Greek mythology. Get cozy, settle in, and let us begin. Chaos and the first forms. In the beginning, there was no Olympus, no earth, no sea, no sky. There was only chaos. And chaos was not the kind of chaos modern tongues describe. Disorder, confusion, frenzy. It was older than language itself. Chaos was a yawning void, a gaping nothingness without form or direction. It was not evil, nor good, nor even neutral. It simply was. From that ancient nothing came the first stirrings of existence. Gaia, the earth, vast and unshaking. Tartarus, the abyss beneath the earth, dark and dreadful. And Eros, the force of love and desire, the binding agent of all future creation. These were not gods as we think of them, not yet, but elemental truths given form. Then came Nyx, the night, clothed in a shadow so thick even chaos recoiled. She was followed by Erebus, the darkness of the underworld, who would dwell beside her in that early silence. From the union of night and darkness came Aethna, the pure upper air breathed by the gods, and Hera the day, who from the beginning was fated to chase her mother endlessly across the sky. Thus the cycle of night and day was born not through science, but through myth, through a family of strange, invisible titans who lit and dimmed the sky with each passing hour. Gaia and Uranus, earth and sky. Gaia, the earth herself, did not lie idle. She was patient and fertile, and from her own body she brought forth Uranus, the sky vast and star-strewn. He was both her son and her consort, and when he arched over her, stretching across the heavens, the world found its first shape, a domed sky above a broad and endless plain. Gaia also birthed the mountains, tall and wild, and Pontus, the sea who surged with a will of his own before ships or sea monsters ever touched his waters. Together, earth and sky became the first great pair, and their union brought forth the Titans, the first generation of powerful beings who would rule the cosmos long before Zeus and his kin rose to power. There were 12 Titans and Sol's sons and 6 daughters, each vast and elemental in their own right. Oceanus, the encircling river, Hyperion, the lord of light, Coeus, the inquirer, Creus, the constellation bearer, Iapetus, the ancestor of men, and Cronus, youngest and most cunning. Among the daughters Theia, shining mother of the sun and moon, Re, future mother of gods, Themis, embodiment of divine law, Mnemosyne, the memory of all things, Phoebe, the radiant one, and Tethys, the nourishing sea. But Gaia's womb was not finished with them. She bore monstrous children as well, beings of strength and dread. First came the Cyclopes, Brontes, Steropes, and Arges, each with a single eye burning like a forge in the center of their brow. They were the smiths of lightning, strong and simple, and they feared no god nor giant. Then came the Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones, each of them enormous and terrible to behold, with 50 heads and 100 arms each, capable of stirring the very foundations of the world when enraged. Uranus, though lord of the sky, trembled at the sight of these monstrous offspring. Ashamed and frightened by their grotesque strength, he forced them back into Gaia's womb, the depths of earth itself, and sealed them there, hidden away beneath layers of rock and grief. Gaia groaned beneath their weight. The earth, once proud and nurturing, now suffered with every breath. It was in this pain that she began to scheme. In the oldest age, before law or justice, before sword or plow, the world was made not with hands, but with force and union and grief. Chaos birthed the first forms, but it was Gaia, the great mother, who gave them ground to stand upon. The first overthrow, Cronus against Uranus, the union of Gaia and Uranus, earth and sky, was the first great marriage of the cosmos. It was not a marriage of altars or witnesses, but of necessity and nature. The sky stretched over the earth, holding her tightly, pressing her beneath his star-studded body night after night. From their joining came the Titans and other mighty offspring, but also a deep and growing sorrow. For Uranus, though proud and vast, was a jealous and fearful father. He saw in the monstrous children Gaia bore not strength, but a threat to his dominion. He looked upon the Cyclopes and the 100-handed giants with revulsion, not wonder, and with swift cruel judgment, he thrust them back into Gaia's womb, deep into the belly of the earth, where no light reached and no voice could echo. Gaia groaned beneath their weight. It was not only the agony of bearing them within her again, but the betrayal of her consort of sky, who should have cherished their children as she did. Night after night, Uranus descended upon her, pressing down the heavens to meet the earth, blind to her pain and deaf to her grief. She could endure no longer. And so, from her own flesh, she fashioned a weapon, not of bronze or iron, for such things had not yet been dreamed, but a great sickle of unyielding flint, jagged as truth and sharp as vengeance. Then she went to her Titan sons, the firstborn and mightiest among her children, and laid bare her suffering. "Your father has wronged me," she said. He has caged your brothers. He has silenced the womb that bore you. Who among you will aid me? One by one they turned away, fearful of their father's might. Only Cronus, the youngest, the shrewdest, the one with watchful eyes and a patient heart, stepped forward. I will do it. He stood give me the blade. So Gaia set the trap. She waited for Uranus to descend as he always did, laying himself across her in the dark. And from the shadows, Cronus sprang. With a steady hand and no hesitation, he brought the sickle down upon his father. The sky shook with Uranus's cry as the blade bit deep, severing the source of his power. Cronus cast the bloodied flesh into the sea, and from the crimson foam that rose upon the waves, something new was born, a figure of impossible beauty, terrible and irresistible in equal measure. From that white froth came Aphrodite, goddess of love and desire, who would later cause kings to fall and empires to burn. She stepped ashore at Cyprus, radiant and serene, untouched by the violence of her origin. But Gaia's vengeance did not end with blood. From the droplets that fell upon the earth sprang other beings, the Furies, cloaked in shadow and vengeance, who would haunt oathbreakers and kinslayers until the end of days, the giants, who in time would rise up against the gods themselves, and the Melii, nymphs of the ash trees, guardians of the wild and the old ways. Uranus, wounded and dethroned, vanished into the heavens, leaving the world to his children. Before he fled, it is said he spoke a final curse, one that would ring through time like a bell. Just as I was overthrown by my son, so too shall he be overthrown by his own. It was not a prophecy he invented, but a truth Gaia had already whispered, and Cronus heard it well. He took the sky throne and wrapped himself in power, but from the moment he grasped it, he began to fear what his father had warned. Thus ended the reign of Uranus, the first king of the cosmos, and began the age of the Titans, the reign of Cronus and the birth of Zeus, with Uranus cast down and the sky no longer pressed so tightly upon the earth. The world breathed anew. The Titans, freed from their father's yoke, now stood tall beneath the heavens, and Cronus, the youngest and most cunning among them, claimed dominion over all. The sickle he had used to bring down Uranus remained hidden, buried in the earth, or cast into the sea, its blade remembered but unseen, like a secret sin. From the very moment he sat the throne of the cosmos, his mind was troubled by the prophecy that had driven him to rebellion. The words of his dying father echoed through him like a second heartbeat, that he too would be cast down by his own child. So Cronus took a wife, as kings must. He chose Rhea, his sister, a Titaness of gentle strength and deep wisdom, and together they ruled through a time later poets would call the Golden Age, a time when mortals, newly created, lived in peace, free from suffering, untouched by winter or war, and the fruits of the earth ripened without need for toil. But such peace, as the world has always known, does not last. In time, Rhea began to bear children, and as each was born, Cronus remembered his father's curse. He did not hesitate. The moment Rhea placed each newborn in his arms, first Hestia, then Demeter, then Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, he opened wide his jaws and swallowed them whole. 5 times she gave birth, and 5 times she lost her children to the hunger of her husband's fear. The 6th time, she resolved to act. She fled to the island of Crete, where the mountains met the sky and deep caves opened beneath the earth. There, hidden among shepherds and nymphs, she gave birth to her youngest son Zeus. To deceive Cronus, she wrapped a stone in swaddling cloth and presented it to him with trembling hands. He swallowed it greedily, thinking the danger had passed. But beneath Mount Ida, the infant Zeus was nursed in secret, guarded by the Curetes, warriors who danced and clashed their shields to drown out the sound of his cries, and fed by the goat Amalthea, whose milk gave him strength beyond measure. The Titanamachy, Zeus against Cronus, in the hidden folds of Mount Ida, Zeus grew to manhood. He drank the milk of Amalthea, and from her broken horn was born the cornucopia, symbol of endless bounty. When Amalthea died, Zeus hung her hide among the stars in her honor. As he came of age, Gaia herself began to stir. Her vengeance had not ended with Uranus, it had only been delayed. She whispered truth into Zeus's dreams and guided his steps. First she led him to Medes, the Titaness of wisdom. With Medes' craft, Zeus offered Cronus a potion laced in wine, bitter-sweet and thick as honey. The drink stirred the old Titan's gut, and at last, with a shudder and a groan, Cronus vomited forth the children he had swallowed long ago. They came not as infants, but full-grown and gleaming, reborn into a world already poised for war. First Hestia, hearth and flame, then Demeter, goddess of the grain, then regal Hera, proud and sharp-eyed, then Hades, lord of the dead, and at last Poseidon, master of the deep. They would not forget. The Titans rallied to Cronus atop Mount Othrys. Oceanus remained apart, too old or too wise for blood feuds, but Coeus, Creus, Hyperion, Iapetus took up arms. So began the Titanomachy, the clash of Titans and Olympians, a war that tore across the heavens and split the earth to its core. For 10 years the battle raged. The Titans held Othrys, the old seat of power. Zeus and his kin made their stand upon Mount Olympus, a peak still unscarred by war. But Gaia knew the balance could not tip without what had been long buried. If Zeus were to win, he must descend into Tartarus and free his monstrous uncles, the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires, whom Cronus had kept locked in chains. The Cyclopes, grateful and eager, gifted Zeus's greatest weapons, the thunderbolt, the symbol of sky and storm. To Poseidon they gave the trident with which he would command the seas, and to Hades a helm of darkness that would make him unseen. The Hecatonchires joined the fight at last, hurling mountains like stones. With these allies, the tide turned, the Titans fell. Deep into Tartarus they were hurled, bound in chains forged by the hundred-handed ones, behind bronze gates that would never rust or break. Only a few escaped that fate: Prometheus and Epimetheus, who had sided with the gods, and Themis, who foresaw the justice of their rule. Dividing the cosmos, when the war was over, the three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hera, gathered and cast lots to divide the realms of the world. Not through bickering or force, but by fate itself did the dice fall. When they landed, the world was drawn into three great dominions. To Zeus fell the sky, the broad heavens, the air between stars and peaks. He became lord of thunder and rain, undisputed king of Olympus. His voice would echo in thunderclaps, his fury would blaze in lightning, and the eagle became his herald, soaring high above all. To Poseidon fell the sea, deep and restless, full of mystery and monsters. He took the oceans, the rivers, and every spring that bubbled from the earth. With his trident he could shatter cliffs and stir the tides to rage or calm. Beneath the waves he built a palace of coral and gold, and there he ruled not only over fish and current, but over creatures older than time, sea serpents, leviathans, and things whose names had never been spoken aloud. To Hades fell the underworld, the land of the dead. It was not a prize most would have chosen, but Hades took it with quiet resolve. There he became master of the shades, the judge of mortal souls, and guardian of wealth hidden in the deeps. Though men feared his name and whispered it only when necessary, Hades kept the balance between life and death, and it was said he never once broke the laws he was sworn to uphold. The earth itself, Gaia's own flesh, was left as a common realm, shared by all. The court of Olympus, on Mount Olympus, high above the clouds, Zeus gathered the new pantheon of gods. Olympus, it was said, had no storms, no snow, no decay. Its halls were of marble and cloud, its ceilings vaulted with starlight. At the summit stood Zeus, king of gods and men, seated upon a throne of thunder, the thunderbolt in his hand. But even he did not rule alone. Hera sat beside him, goddess of marriage, of queenship and childbirth, and the silent fury of a woman wronged. Demeter, goddess of grain and growth, walked often in the world below, watching over the plowmen and mothers who whispered her name at dawn. Hestia, the firstborn of Cronus and Rhea, tended the eternal flame in the center of Olympus, and her power was gentle but ever present, for as long as fire burned in a household, Hestia lived there too. The younger gods came in time. Athena was first, born not of womb, but of wisdom. When Zeus swallowed Medes, fearing her unborn child would surpass him, he thought the matter ended. But Medes did not die. She lived within him, whispering, scheming, crafting knowledge in the dark. One day Zeus groaned in agony, and with a blow to his skull Athena sprang forth, fully grown, clad in bronze, spear in hand. She became goddess of wisdom, strategy, and just war. Apollo and Artemis came next, twins born of Leto on the floating island of Delos. Apollo, golden-haired, became the god of light, prophecy, music, and healing. Artemis, swift and silver, was goddess of the hunt and the moon. Then came Ares, god of war and slaughter, strength without discipline, rage without cause. His opposite was Hephaestus, the lame god of the forge, limping but brilliant, master of craft and flame. Aphrodite arrived not by birth but by foam, rising from the surf at Cyprus, as beautiful as she was dangerous. And Hermes, the trickster and herald, son of Zeus and the nymph Maia, moved swiftly between worlds, winged sandals at his feet, a mischievous grin on his lips. Where Hermes went, borders dissolved. This was the Olympian court, raw, flawed, radiant, and vast. Prometheus and the fire of man. Long before men raised cities of marble, there were no humans upon the earth. It was Prometheus, a titan of the old blood, who first imagined the shape of man. His name meant forethought, and it suited him. He was brother to Epimetheus, whose name meant afterthought, and never was a pair of brothers more different. Some say Prometheus sculpted the first men from clay beside the banks of a river, his fingers smoothing mud into limbs, his breath giving them life. But the first men were weak, soft of skin, slow of foot, defenseless against the beasts of the world. Prometheus looked upon them and pitied them. He went to Olympus and asked that man be given a gift. But Zeus refused. Fire, he declared, was the privilege of immortals. Prometheus did not yield. In secret, he stole a flame from the forge of Hephaestus, hid it in a hollow fennel stalk, and carried it down from Olympus. For the first time, fire crackled beneath the stars. With fire came warmth, safety, cooking metal, language, craft. Humanity, once cold and voiceless, began to build. To punish mankind, Zeus commissioned a gift in disguise. Hephaestus shaped her from clay, a woman of perfect beauty. Aphrodite gave her charm. Hermes gave her cunning. Athena clothed her in silver raiment. Her name was Pandora, all gifted. She was given a sealed jar containing the sorrows of the world, disease, toil, grief, madness, envy, and death itself. Epimetheus, ever the fool, took her into his home despite Prometheus's warnings. And when Pandora, driven by curiosity, opened the jar, the evils spilled out into the world. Only hope remained inside. For Prometheus, Zeus ordered him chained to a mountain at the edge of the world. There he was bound in adamantine chains, and each day an eagle would descend and feast upon his liver. Each night it would grow back. He endured it for generations, long after kingdoms rose and fell, yet he did not repent. He knew a secret that one day the king of the gods would fall, not by blade or rebellion, but by his own seed. The 5 ages of man, Hesiod the Boeotian farmer and poet, was the first to set the ages of humanity into words, dividing the long march of mortal existence into 5 distinct epochs: gold, silver, bronze, heroic, and iron. Each was less than the one before, save one. In the Golden Age, men lived like gods themselves, free from pain, untouched by age, unburdened by toil. The earth gave forth her bounty without coaxing. They died as if falling into sleep, their spirits becoming guardians, kindly daemons, watchful over the world. In the Silver Age, mortals grew tall and strong, but lacked the wisdom and restraint of the golden race. They lingered in childhood for 100 years and grew into violent, arrogant men who refused to honor the gods. For this, Zeus struck them down. The Bronze Age was born of ash trees, the same trees used for spears and shields. These were creatures of war, mighty and hard, their flesh said to be forged from bronze. They lived for battle and died by it, sowing the world with blood and ash. From the smoke of the Bronze Age rose a brief and brilliant light, the heroic age. The demigods, the sons and daughters of gods and men, built cities, sailed seas, and carved their names into the memory of the world. This was the age of Perseus and Heracles, of Theseus and Atalanta, of Jason and the Argonauts, of Hector and Achilles and Odysseus. Then came the age that Hesiod called his own, the Iron Age, where we still dwell. This is a time of sorrow and toil, a world grown old and heavy. Justice, once tall and golden, now walks with her eyes averted. And yet for all that, the Iron Age endures. Men still build, still hope, still tell stories of a time when mortals were golden and gods walked among them. Perhaps that hope, fragile though it is the one gift Zeus did not take back when Pandora opened the jar. Perseus, son of the golden rain. Among the first and greatest of the heroes was Perseus, slayer of monsters, founder of dynasties. His tale begins not in battle, but in prophecy and fear. His mother, Danae, was a princess of Argos, daughter to King Acrisius. An oracle warned the king that his daughter would bear a son destined to kill him. So Acrisius locked Danae in a tower of bronze beneath the earth, a room sealed against time and men alike. But Zeus, in the form of golden rain, slipped through cracks no wall could keep and fell upon Danae in her solitude. When Acrisius discovered the child, he placed Danae and her infant son into a wooden chest and cast them into the sea. The chest drifted to the island of Seriphos, where a humble fisherman named Dictys drew it ashore. He took them in, and Perseus grew tall and strong. But King Polydex of Seriphos desired Danae, and to remove the son who stood between them, he demanded that Perseus bring him the head of Medusa, the mortal Gorgon whose gaze could turn flesh to stone. The gods favored Perseus. Athena lent her polished mirror shield. Hermes gave him a curved sword and winged sandals, and directed him to the Grey sisters, who shared a single eye between them. Perseus stole their eye and bargained for the truth. They told him of the nymphs who kept the sacred items. He would need the helm of Hades, which made its wearer invisible, a kibises, a magical sack to contain the Gorgon's head, and the location of the lair beyond ocean's edge. He found Medusa and her sisters sleeping among the statues of those who had come before. With Athena's shield held before him, he walked backward, step by cautious step, and severed her head. From her blood sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, the warrior with a golden blade. On the way home, Perseus rescued Andromeda from a sea monster, turning it to stone with the Gorgon's head, and claimed her as his bride. When he returned to Seriphos, he turned Polydex and his court to stone, and made Dictys king in his stead. But prophecy once spoken is not so easily undone. At the funeral games of a neighboring king, Perseus, throwing a discus, struck an old man in the crowd, Acrisius, his grandfather. So the circle closed. Perseus had fulfilled the prophecy, though not by malice, for from his blood would come Heracles. Heracles, the mightiest of mortals. If Perseus was the first great hero, Heracles was the mightiest. His birth was itself a trick of time. Zeus, ever lustful, desired Alcmene, wife of the Theban general Amphitryon. Disguised as her husband, the king of gods lay with her, extending a single night into threefold length. From that union came Heracles, and from Amphitryon a twin Iphicles, mortal and unblessed. Hera, as always, watched with a cold and bitter eye, and made the life of Heracles a crucible of torment. While still in his cradle, she sent serpents to kill him, and the infant strangled them with his bare hands. Heracles grew into a man of impossible strength. He married Megara, daughter of King Creon of Thebes, and for a time lived in peace. But Hera had not forgotten. In a fit of divine madness, Heracles slew his wife and children with the same hands that had once cradled them. To atone, he sought out the oracle of Delphi, who told him he must submit to the will of Eurystheus, king of Tiryns, and complete 12 labors. Thus began the 12 labors. He slew the Nemean lion, whose hide no blade could pierce, strangling it in its cave with his bare hands, and wearing its skin thereafter as armor. He battled the Lernaean hydra in the swamps, aided by his nephew Iolaus, who cauterized the stumps as they were cut. From the last head, immortal and venomous, Heracles harvested ichor and dipped his arrows in it, making them deadly even to gods. The third labor was to capture the Cyrenian hind, a golden-horned deer sacred to Artemis. Heracles chased it for a year across hills and rivers, before gently capturing it alive. The fourth led him to the Erymanthian boar, which he wrestled in the snow-covered heights of Arcadia and dragged back to Tiryns in chains, as Eurystheus hid in terror inside a bronze jar. The fifth was the cleansing of the Augean stables, homes to thousands of cattle untouched by broom or shovel for decades. Heracles, ever the problem solver, rerouted 2 rivers to wash the filth away in a single day. The sixth was to drive away the Stymphalian birds, man-eating creatures with bronze beaks and razor-feathered wings. With the aid of a rattle from Athena, he startled them into flight and shot them down from the sky. The seventh sent him to capture the Cretan bull, a beast of divine origin that had fathered the Minotaur. The eighth took him north to Thrace, where he tamed the mares of Diomes, flesh-eating horses. He fed Diomes their master to them, and the beasts grew docile. The ninth was a labor of diplomacy, and blood the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. Though the queen had agreed to gift it peacefully, Hera spread rumors among the warrior women and battle broke out. Heracles slew Hippolyta and escaped with the belt. The 10th led him to the edge of the known world to Erythia, where he stole the cattle of Geryon, a triple-bodied giant, and built the pillars of Heracles at the Strait of Gibraltar to mark his passing. The 11th required him to steal the golden apples of the Hesperides, guarded by nymphs and a sleepless dragon. He tricked Atlas, the sky-bearer, into retrieving them while he held the heavens. When Atlas tried to leave him the burden, Heracles asked for a moment to adjust his cloak, and took back the sky while fleeing with the fruit. The 12th and final labor was the most harrowing, to descend into Hades itself and bring back Cerberus, the 3-headed hound. Armed with nothing but his strength, Heracles wrestled Cerberus into submission and led the beast, snarling and frothing, into the land of the living. With that final labor, his redemption was won, yet Heracles' life was not yet at peace. He fought more battles, took new wives, and fathered many children. But Hera's hatred endured. In the end, it was not blade or monster that killed him, but the poisoned blood of the centaur Nessus, smeared upon a tunic gifted by his wife Deianira, who believed it a love charm. As the poison burned through his flesh, Heracles built his own pyre upon Mount Oda. No mortal dared light it until Philoctetes, a simple shepherd, stepped forward. For that, he was given the hero's bow. Heracles was consumed by flame, but in death he was reborn. Zeus lifted him to Olympus, where he was granted immortality and married to Hebe, goddess of youth. He became the only mortal to join the pantheon, a god forged in agony. Theseus, king of Athens. If Heracles was the greatest of Greek heroes, then Theseus was the most political, the most cunning, the most human. He was not merely a slayer of beasts. He was a builder of cities, a weaver of laws, and the founding spirit of Athens. Theseus was born of 2 fathers, King Aegeus of Athens and Poseidon, god of the sea. His mother, Aithra, lay with both on the same night. Before leaving, Aegeus had hidden a sword and sandals beneath a heavy stone, telling Aithra that when the boy was strong enough to lift the stone, he would be ready to claim his birthright. At 16, Theseus moved the stone with a grunt and a grin, and took up his father's tokens. Many would have sailed the easy road to Athens, but Theseus chose the land route, for he believed kingship must be earned, not inherited. And so began the 6 labors of Theseus, not vast like Heracles's, but earthy and intimate, each a monster of the road. He defeated Periphetes, the club-bearer, and took his weapon. He slew Cines, who tied travelers to bent pines and tore them in 2. He pushed Cyren from the cliffs into the sea, ending the reign of a man who kicked passers-by to their deaths. He out-wrestled Circean, and Procrustes, who made beds fit travelers by stretching or cutting them, found his own death in the same iron frame. When Theseus arrived in Athens, King Aegeus did not at first recognize him. Medea, now wife to Aegeus and still seething with old sorceries, saw the threat in the boy and urged the king to poison him. But Theseus presented the sword and sandals, and at the last moment Aegeus cast the cup aside and embraced his son. Trouble was already stirring. Athens had been defeated in war by Crete, and as punishment King Minos demanded that 7 young men and 7 maidens be sent every 9 years to feed the Minotaur, a monstrous havoc in a twisting labyrinth designed by Daedalus, the great inventor. Theseus volunteered himself among the chosen. He promised his father that if he succeeded, he would return with white sails upon his ship. If he failed, the sails would remain black. On Crete, Ariadne, daughter of Minos and half-sister to the Minotaur, saw Theseus and loved him. She gave him a gift, a ball of thread, and the secret to the labyrinth's winding paths. That night, Theseus entered the maze. In its dark coils he found the beast fought without words, and struck it down, then followed the thread back into the light. He fled with Ariadne and the freed Athenians, sailing into the Aegean. But on the island of Naxos, Theseus abandoned Ariadne. Some say Dionysus claimed her for his own, others that Theseus feared what a Cretan bride might mean for an Athenian throne. She woke alone and wept beneath unfamiliar stars. Theseus continued home, but in his sorrow or forgetfulness, he failed to change the sails. From the cliffs of Athens, King Aegeus saw black on the horizon and believed his son dead. Grief-stricken, he leapt into the sea, which still bears his name, the Aegean. Now King Theseus did not rest. He unified Attica, the region around Athens, binding its villages into one city-state. He established festivals and games, temples and laws. He was a hero of governance as much as of combat. He ventured again into myth, fighting alongside Heracles against the Amazons, journeying to the underworld with his reckless friend Pirithous to steal Persephone herself from Hades. That journey ended in failure. Pirithous was swallowed by the earth, and Theseus was trapped upon the chair of forgetfulness, his memory eroded by the air of death. Only Heracles, on his own journey, tore him free. In the end, the Athenians, tired of kings and haunted by new heroes and new philosophies, drove Theseus into exile. He fled to the island of Skyros, where he was betrayed by a jealous king and cast from a cliff. His bones would later be retrieved and buried in honor. But at the time of his death he was alone, no crowd, no crown, no chorus. And yet his legacy endured. Where Heracles symbolized the strength of the body, Theseus embodied the strength of the polis, the city, the law, the people bound by more than blood. Athens would rise on his shoulders. Jason and the Argonauts, long before Troy burned, there came a voyage unlike any other, a quest that crossed continents and gods, bound heroes into brotherhood, and ended in betrayal and exile. At its center was Jason, a prince exiled in childhood, a hero groomed not by war, but by the long, slow fire of vengeance. His tale began in Iolcus, a coastal kingdom in Thessaly. Jason's father had been usurped by his own brother Peleus, a man who worshipped no law but power. Fearing the boy who might one day rise against him, Peleus sought to kill Jason at birth, but the infant was smuggled from court and raised in secret by the wise centaur Chiron, who had trained Achilles, Asclepius, and other sons of fate. Jason grew strong in the wild, his limbs hardened by hunting, his mind by songs of kings who had fallen and risen again. Years later, Jason returned a man clad in a single sandal, for as he crossed the river Onours, he had lost one in the muddy current while carrying an old woman across. The woman was Hera in disguise, testing the young hero. When he entered the city, Peleus turned pale, for an oracle had once warned him, beware the man who comes with one shoe. Peleus, too shrewd to strike openly, feigned welcome and offered a test. If you wish to be king, he said, retrieve for me the golden fleece from the far land of Colchis. Bring back that ancient prize, and I will yield the crown. Jason summoned the greatest heroes of his age. Heracles came, and Orpheus with his lyre. Atalanta the huntress, Castor and Pollux the sons of Zeus, Meleager, Theseus and Zetes and Calais, winged sons of the north wind. 50 heroes in all. Together they boarded a ship named Argo, built by Argus under Athena's guidance. In its prow she set a piece of sacred oak from Dodona, a timber that could speak in prophecy. They sailed east into legend. On Lemnos they met a land ruled by women who had slain all their husbands. In Thrace they encountered the blind seer Phineus. Tormented by harpies that fouled his food, the winged Boreads drove the creatures off, earning Phineus's prophecy a path through the clashing rocks, 2 cliffs that slammed shut like jaws upon any who tried to pass. At his advice they released a dove. It flew through and lost only a single tail feather. The Argo followed at full speed, and the rocks caught her stern, but just barely. From then on, the passage remained still. At last they reached Colchis, a land of fire and iron. King Aetes, son of the sun god Helios, agreed to grant the fleece only if Jason completed 3 tasks: yoke fire-breathing bulls, plow a field with them, sow it with dragon's teeth, and defeat the warriors who would rise from the soil. These were not tests of courage, but of impossibility. It would have ended there had the gods not intervened. Eros, at Hera's urging, struck Medea, daughter of Aetes, priestess of Hecate, versed in herbs and poison, with an arrow of love. She gave Jason a potion to shield him from flame, taught him to hurl a stone among the earthborn warriors so they would turn on one another, and at last led him to the fleece itself, guarded by a serpent that never slept. Medea sang spells, the beast sank into slumber, and Jason seized the fleece and fled with her into the dark. Aetes pursued them, but Medea, already stained, had taken her young brother Apsyrtus, cut him into pieces, and scattered them in the sea, forcing her father to stop and gather the limbs for burial. The Argo slipped away, stained by crime and magic. Their return wound passed Scylla and Charybdis, through lands of danger and delay. At length they returned to Iolcus, but Peleus refused to yield the crown. Medea, in vengeance, tricked his daughters into cutting him to pieces and boiling him alive, claiming it was a spell of rejuvenation. The people rose up in horror, and Jason, now tainted by treachery, was exiled. He fled to Corinth, where he and Medea lived for years in uneasy peace. But Jason, ever seeking legitimacy, cast Medea aside for a Corinthian princess. Medea, wronged and vengeful, poisoned the bride's gown, burning her to ash, and murdered her own sons by Jason. Then she fled, carried away in a chariot drawn by dragons, a gift from her grandfather Helios. Jason, broken, returned to Iolcus and wandered among ruins. One day, resting beneath the Argo, now dry-docked and decaying, a beam broke loose and struck his skull. So passed the great hero, not in battle, not in glory, but in silence beneath the bones of his past. The house of Thebes, Cadmus and Oedipus. There are few bloodlines in Greek myth darker than the royal house of Thebes. Where most heroes battled monsters or sailed for distant thrones, the Theban kings fought their own kin and warred against the past itself. Their legacy is not carved in bronze, but written in riddles, madness, and murder. The city's foundation was steeped in omens. Thebes began with a quest. Cadmus, a Phoenician prince and brother to Europa, set out to find his sister after Zeus abducted her in the guise of a white bull. Unable to recover her, Cadmus sought guidance from the oracle at Delphi, who told him to abandon his search, follow a cow until it lay down, and there found a city. He wandered until the beast collapsed upon a hill. But when Cadmus sent his companions for water, they met their deaths at the hands of a serpent sacred to Ares, guarding a spring. Cadmus slew the serpent himself, and at Athena's bidding sowed its teeth into the soil. From the earth sprang armed warriors, the Spartoi, the sown men, who turned on one another until only 5 remained. These 5 became the noble families of Thebes, and Cadmus their king. The slaying of Ares' serpent drew divine wrath. Cadmus served the war god for 8 years in penance. He married Harmonia, daughter of Ares and Aphrodite, and the gods themselves came to their wedding. But the couple received a cursed necklace forged by Hephaestus, a thing of beauty that would bring ruin to all who wore it. And so the doom of Thebes began not in hatred, but in celebration, cursed by beauty and blood. Generations passed. Cadmus's daughters met cruel fates. Ino went mad and threw her child into the sea. Autana, his son Actaeon, was torn apart by his own hounds after glimpsing Artemis bathing. Semele, beloved by Zeus, was tricked by Hera into demanding he reveal his true form, and died in flame. And Agave, in a frenzy of Dionysian madness, tore her own son Pentheus limb from limb, believing him to be a lion. But it was through Cadmus's great-grandson Laius that the true tragedy unfolded. Laius became king of Thebes and took Jocasta as his queen. The gods had not forgiven the line of Cadmus. An oracle came if Laius ever had a son, that child would kill his father and marry his mother. Laius lay with Jocasta anyway, and a son was born. Terrified, Laius ordered the infant's ankles pierced and bound, then gave him to a servant to be abandoned on Mount Cithaeron. But the servant, pitying the child, passed him to a shepherd, who delivered him to the king and of Corinth, Polybus and Merope, who were childless and welcomed the boy as their own. They named him Oedipus, meaning swollen foot, and never told him the truth of his blood. Oedipus grew into a clever and proud young man. Rumors of his birth reached him, and he journeyed to Delphi, where the oracle gave him the same prophecy once spoken to Laius, that he would kill his father and marry his mother. Horrified, believing Polybus and Merope to be his true parents, Oedipus fled Corinth, unwittingly running toward his fate. On the road at a crossroads, he encountered a stranger, old, proud, imperious. A quarrel broke out over the rite of passage, and in the heat of rage Oedipus slew the man and his attendants, never knowing he had just killed his true father. He continued on to Thebes, which was under siege, not by an army, but by the Sphinx, a creature with the body of a lion, wings of an eagle, and the face of a woman, who devoured all who failed to answer her riddle, what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening. Oedipus answered without hesitation, man. The Sphinx, defeated, threw herself from a cliff. Thebes rejoiced. Its deliverer was made king, and in gratitude given the widowed queen as his bride Jocasta, his mother. Years passed. Oedipus ruled well and had 4 children, Eteocles, Polynices, Antigone, and Ismene. But plague fell upon Thebes, and the oracle proclaimed the land was cursed by unpunished blood. Slowly, terribly, the truth unraveled. The old man at the crossroads, the queen's grief, the scarred feet, the servant who survived, and the blind prophet Tiresias, who named the king as both father and brother, son and husband. Jocasta hanged herself. Oedipus took her brooches and blinded himself, piercing his own eyes. He begged to be exiled and wandered the land, guided only by Antigone's hand. In the hills near Colonus he found sanctuary, and at last a quiet death swallowed by the earth, his grave a secret kept by the gods. But his children did not escape the curse. Eteocles and Polynices fought for the throne. When Polynices was exiled, he raised an army from Argos and led the 7 against Thebes, a war that bathed the city in blood. The brothers slew each other in single combat at the gates. Antigone, the last to carry the old honor, buried her brother despite royal decree. For this she was condemned by her uncle Creon and buried alive. The tale of Oedipus is not one of monsters slain or cities built. It is a tale of fate, of how a man may do all he can to outrun a prophecy and still run straight into its arms. A tragedy not born of evil, but of ignorance. The war for Helen, judgment of Paris, of all the wars that ever ravaged mortal soil, none would echo louder than the one fought for a woman's face. A war of oaths and pride, of beauty and betrayal, of gods and kings and the fall of empires. It began not with spears, but with a wedding, one that all the gods were invited to, save for one. Eris, goddess of discord, was not welcome at the marriage of Peleus and Thetis. The sea nymph fated to bear a son greater than his father. In her fury, Eris cast into the feast a golden apple inscribed with 3 words to the fairest. The apple was claimed by Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, each believing herself most worthy. To settle the dispute, they turned to a mortal shepherd, Prince Paris, son of King Priam of Troy, who had been exiled to the hills after an omen foretold he would one day burn the city of his birth. The gods brought him to judgment on Mount Ida, and one by one they offered bribes. Hera promised kingship over all men. Athena pledged wisdom and victory in war. But Aphrodite, with a smile like soft thunder, offered him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose love, and thus Helen of Sparta, daughter of Zeus and wife of Menelaus, was marked. Helen had many suitors in her youth, princes and kings from across Achaea, drawn not only by her beauty, but by the promise of bloodlines that reached Olympus. Her mortal father, King Tyndareus, feared the war her hand would spark. On the advice of Odysseus, he bound the suitors with a sacred oath that whoever won Helen, all the others would swear to defend that union and punish any who dared violate it. Menelaus, brother to King Agamemnon of Mycenae, won her hand. But when Paris came to visit under the pretense of peace and right, he saw Helen and saw her the prize Aphrodite had promised. Whether she went with him willingly or was taken remains a matter of song and shadow. But when Paris sailed back across the Aegean, Helen was with him, and in that hour the war began. Menelaus called upon the oath, and all who had sworn it answered. Odysseus of Ithaca, clever and reluctant, Nestor the old sage of Pylos, Ajax the greater son of Telamon, towering and grim, Ajax the lesser swift and fierce, Diomes of Argos, brave and battle-hungry, Idomeneus of Crete, stalwart and steady. From all corners of Hellas they came. Only 2 held back. Odysseus pretended madness, sowing salt into his fields, until a clever envoy placed his infant son before the plow. And Achilles, son of Thetis, was hidden by his mother among the daughters of Lycomedes, dressed in silks to escape a fate she foresaw. But the Greeks found him, Odysseus again, tricking Achilles with a spear and shield amid gifts of jewelry, and the boy chose war. They gathered at Aulis, a fleet of 1,000 ships, but the winds did not rise. The seer Calchas revealed that Artemis had been offended, and that only a great sacrifice would appease her Iphigenia, daughter of Agamemnon. There are stories of lies told to bring her to Aulis under the guise of marriage to Achilles, of her weeping mother Clytemnestra, of the moment the blade fell, and of a last-moment rescue, with Artemis spiriting the girl away and replacing her with a deer. But in most tellings the blood was real. The winds came, the fleet sailed east, and the world changed. The wrath of Achilles, the Iliad, by the time Homer's Iliad begins, the war at Troy has endured for 9 long years. The Greeks had built black-walled camps along the shore, hauled their ships high upon the sand, and sent out raiding parties day after day, not just to battle, but to feed their armies. The Trojans, safe behind walls raised, it was said, by Poseidon himself and the mortal builder Apollo had once served in penance, endured. Their allies came from the east and north, Sarpedon of Lycia, Memnon of Ethiopia, and yet the Greeks would not leave, not without Helen. In this war, two hearts burned hotter than the rest: Agamemnon, king of kings, stern and imperial, and Achilles, son of Thetis and Peleus, unmatched in battle, fated to die young, and determined to make that death matter. Their quarrel began over a woman. In one of many raids, the Greeks had taken captives. Among them were Chryseis, daughter of a priest of Apollo, and Briseis, a princess of Leonosus. Chryseis was awarded to Agamemnon, Briseis to Achilles. When Chryseis' father came to ransom her, bearing golden gifts, Agamemnon scorned him. The old man prayed to Apollo, and the god answered with plague. The prophet Calchas at last revealed the truth, and Agamemnon, forced to surrender Chryseis to save his army, demanded Briseis from Achilles in compensation. It was a slight Achilles could not endure. He rose from the council in fury, called Agamemnon a greedy coward, and swore an oath before the gods he would no longer fight for the Greeks. Let them bleed without him, and so he withdrew to his tent, and with him went the Middens, his elite warriors. From that moment the tide turned. Without Achilles, the Greeks began to suffer. The Trojans pressed harder. Hector, son of Priam and champion of Troy, led the charge with a quiet, noble fury. He was the heart of the city, a husband, a father, a prince who carried the burden of his people not in pride, but in duty. Day by day the Trojans pushed the Greeks back to the sea. Heroes fell. Patroclus, friend and companion of Achilles, some say a friend, others a lover, but all agree the only one who could reach Achilles in his grief and fury watched the losses mount with growing despair. When the Trojans breached the Greek defenses and threatened to burn the ships, Patroclus begged Achilles to let him fight in his stead. He wore the hero's armor, rode his chariot, led the Myrmidons into battle, and for a time the Greeks rallied. But Patroclus, flushed with borrowed glory, went too far. He reached the gates of Troy, and there he met Hector. Their duel was brutal, and it ended with Patroclus falling beneath Hector's spear. With him fell whatever peace remained in Achilles' heart. When Achilles learned of his death, his grief shook the camp. He did not weep like a man, he howled like a storm god filled with rage and ruin. He returned to battle not for glory, not for oaths, but for vengeance. His mother Thetis brought him new armor forged by Hephaestus himself, bronze that gleamed like the sun, a shield carved with the history of the world. Then Achilles went to war. No one could stand against him. He chased Hector around the walls of Troy 3 times before they met in single combat. Hector fought bravely, but Achilles was a fire no water could quench. He struck Hector down and in rage dragged his body behind his chariot, circling the city day after day, denying the dead prince the dignity of burial. It was Priam, the old king of Troy, who brought an end to that madness. At night, guided by Hermes, he crept into the Greek camp and knelt before Achilles. He kissed the hands that had killed his son. He spoke not as a king, but as a father, and Achilles finally wept. He returned Hector's body and gave Priam safe passage. For a moment there was quiet in the war. But peace, as always, was fleeting. Achilles would not survive Troy. A poisoned arrow, some say fired by Paris, others guided by Apollo, struck his heel. The only vulnerable point died in the dust, young and unmatched, and the war dragged on without him. The wooden horse and the fall of Troy, the war had bled the land dry. 10 years of siege had turned warriors into husks and kings into ghosts. Then, just as the gods began to turn their gaze elsewhere, the Greeks vanished. At dawn, the Trojans climbed their towers and saw no sails upon the sea. The ships were gone. In their place on the plain outside the Scaean gate stood a colossal wooden horse, tall as a temple, its flanks of smooth planked cedar, its mane carved in honor of Poseidon. No soldiers stirred, no weapons clashed. The war, it seemed, had ended in silence. Troy did not rejoice easily. Priam, old and cautious, questioned what he saw. But it was Sinon, a cunning Greek left behind, who broke the city's fate wide open. Pretending to be a deserter, he spun a tale that the horse was an offering to Athena, a peace token left behind after the Greeks had sailed away. If the Trojans brought it into their city, it would guarantee their dominance for generations. If they dared destroy it, ruin would follow. Only Laocoon, priest of Poseidon, spoke the truth. Beware Greeks bearing gifts, he warned, and hurled a spear into the side of the horse. The wood groaned. Something shifted within, but in that moment, as if the gods themselves had tired of warning men, a pair of sea serpents rose from the surf and crushed Laocoon and his sons in their coils. The people, seeing this, called it a sign. With ropes and wheels, they brought the horse inside their walls. That night, while the city feasted and the fires died down, A trap door in the belly of the beast opened with a groan like thunder. Out came Odysseus, Menelaus, Neoptolemus, Diomedes, and others, handpicked for cruelty and cunning. At the same hour, the Greek fleet, hidden on the nearby isle of Tenedos, returned silently under cover of night.
Troy slept.
What for it was slaughter. Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles, stormed through the palace like a black wind. He killed Priam at the altar of Zeus, the old king's blood soaking the stones. Cassandra, daughter of Priam and curse prophetess, was dragged screaming from the temple of Athena, her warnings once again unheard. Astyanax, Hector's infant son, was thrown from the walls so no heir might one day rise. Temples were desecrated, women taken, and the city of Troy, once the pride of Asia, was given to flame. Helen, whose face had launched 1,000 ships, was found in the palace. Menelaus, blade in hand, looked into her eyes and dropped the sword. He took her back to Sparta, and the war at last claimed its final victory. The victors carried their own curses. Ajax the Lesser, who had violated Cassandra in Athena's temple, was drowned at sea. Agamemnon, returning home with Cassandra as a concubine, was murdered in his bath by his wife Clytemnestra. Odysseus, cursed by Poseidon, would not see home for 10 long years. Only Aeneas, son of Anchises and Aphrodite, escaped Troy with his father on his back and his son by the hand, carrying the last ember of Troy westward toward Italy. From his blood, so the Romans would later claim, came Romulus, Remus, and an empire even mightier than Troy. The fall of Troy was not just the end of a city. It was the end of an age, the heroic age. The long road home, the Nostoi, the fall of Troy was not the end of the story, but the beginning of another kind of tragedy, one fought not in open fields, but on dark seas, in storm-tossed isles, and in the crumbling halls of once-proud kings. For those who survived the war, the journey home would prove far more perilous than the war itself. Agamemnon, the High King, returned first, or so it seemed. He sailed with Cassandra, the Trojan prophetess taken as a concubine. The gods had not forgotten the sacrifice of Iphigenia, his daughter slain to appease Artemis, and in Mycenae, Clytemnestra had not forgotten either. She had taken a lover in Agamemnon's absence, Aegisthus, a cousin with his own score to settle, descended from the cursed house of Atreus. Together, they plotted murder beneath the roof Agamemnon had built. When the king returned, he walked into his palace as into a trap. Some say he was stabbed in the bath. Others, that Clytemnestra wrapped him in a robe and struck him down with an axe. Cassandra died too, murdered at the threshold of a foreign land. In time, vengeance came again. Orestes, son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra, returned from exile and slew both his mother and her lover, urged on by Apollo and hounded afterward by the Furies, ancient goddesses who punish kinslaying with madness. His a tale of blood and absolution, one that would echo in Athenian courts and myth for generations. Menelaus and Helen wandered long across the sea, driven southward to Egypt by contrary winds. Some versions say the Helen who went to Troy was only a phantom, and the real woman had remained in Egypt the whole time, waiting unaged while a war raged for her shadow. Others say she went willingly with Paris, and that Menelaus forgave her, wearied by war and longing for peace. They returned to Sparta at last and ruled together in uneasy silence. But it was Odysseus whose journey became the most storied, the most sorrowful, the most enduring. After Troy, he sailed not for home, but into a 10-year trial by sea, caught between the wrath of Poseidon and the whims of fate. He blinded Polyphemus, the Cyclops son of Poseidon, escaping with the clever name of Nobody. He tarried with Circe, the sorceress who turned his men into swine, and with Calypso, the sea Nymph who kept him as a lover for 7 long years. He journeyed to the edge of the underworld, spoke with the dead, and heard the song of the sirens, tied to the mast while his crew rode with ears plugged by wax. He sailed between Scylla and Charybdis, lost all his men to storm and folly, and at last washed ashore alone on the island of the Phaeacians, who, moved by his tale, gave him a ship and safe passage. At last he returned to Ithaca in rags and silence, his beard long, his eyes cold. There, in his absence, suitors had overrun his house, plotting to marry his wife Penelope, who had waited weaving and unweaving the same shroud by candlelight. Odysseus, with the help of his son Telemachus, his loyal swineherd, and the bow only he could string, slew the suitors one by one. Blood filled the great hall. Peace returned, but only for a time. The Trojan War had promised glory. It had delivered only ashes. The heroes who had once stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the walls of Ilium returned to broken homes, bitter wives, hostile gods, and the hollow echo of songs that no longer matched the truth. In the end, there were no victors, only survivors. The Olympians in full, behind every mortal tragedy, the Olympians moved. Zeus ruled from his golden throne, the thunderbolt always within reach. His liaisons were countless, with goddesses, nymphs, and mortal women, each union producing children who would rattle the world: Heracles, Perseus, Helen, Minos, and many more. Hera, ever watchful, punished his lovers and their offspring with wrath, both cold and enduring. Beside them stood Athena, born from Zeus's own skull, fully formed and armored, goddess of wisdom and warcraft. She favored mortals who used cleverness over brute force, Odysseus above all, and guided cities like Athens to flourish under law and reason. Unlike Ares, who delighted in slaughter, Athena's warfare was disciplined and precise. Her presence marked the Olympian era as one of intellect as much as strength. Apollo and Artemis, twin children of Leto, brought light and shadow in equal measure. Apollo claimed the oracle at Delphi, speaking in riddles through the Pythia, shaping kings and battles with a few cryptic words. Yet he could also bring plague, as he did upon the Achaeans at Troy. Artemis roamed the forests untouched by men, a huntress and protector of wild things. She asked no permission and gave no forgiveness. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, kept the earth fertile, except when her daughter Persephone was taken by Hades. In her grief, Demeter let the crops wither, and from her sorrow the seasons were born. Aphrodite ruled love and desire. Her beauty stirred both gods and mortals to madness. She was married to Hephaestus, the lame smith god, but gave her heart and body to Ares, the god of war. Together, they embodied the chaos of passion and conflict. Hermes, quick-souled son of Zeus, moved between worlds as messenger, thief, and guide of souls, the god of boundaries, both keeper and breaker of them. No door was closed to Hermes. The Olympians were not distant creators. They were immanent, meddling, playing favorites, waging subtle wars through the hands of mortals. Unlike the Titans, who embodied elemental force, the Olympians were reflections of human nature elevated to divine scale. Their loves were messy, their grudges eternal, their pride vast. Yet beneath their grandeur lay a constant truth: their power, though vast, was not absolute. They could be bound by oaths, tricked by mortals, and undone by time. Even Zeus, in his glory, was haunted by the same fear that doomed his father, that one day a child of his would rise to overthrow him. His union with Thetis was abandoned for this reason. She was wed instead to the mortal Peleus, so that Achilles, her son, would die young and not ascend. In this, the Olympians were no different from men. Dionysus and the mystery cults, the Olympians were mighty, but they were not unchallenged. Even as temples to Zeus reached toward the sky, darker gods walked the earth, gods of wine and madness, of death and rebirth, of things not carved into public altars, but whispered in secret groves and torchlit caves. Chief among them was Dionysus, the last to take his seat on Olympus, and the only one who truly stood between the divine and the wild. Dionysus was no ordinary god. His birth alone defied the laws of nature and propriety. He was the son of Zeus and Semele, a mortal princess of Thebes. When Semele, tricked by Hera, demanded Zeus reveal his true divine form, she was consumed by his thunderous radiance. Yet from her ashes Zeus plucked the unborn child and sewed him into his own thigh. Months later, Dionysus was born again, twice born, they would call him. He was raised not on Olympus, but in far corners of the world, among nymphs in Nysa, in the company of satyrs and maenads. He wandered, not ruling from a throne, but roaming with flute and vine, his train of revelers trailing behind in ecstatic dance. Where he walked, vineyards bloomed and reason faltered. He was not merely the god of wine, but of alteration, of the thin, sacred line between civilization and chaos, between ecstasy and insanity. His arrival in Greece was not without resistance. Cities mocked his rites. Kings barred his worship. One by one, he punished them. In Thebes, his mother's homeland, the young god returned in disguise, his followers stirring unrest with drums and cries. Pentheus, the rigid king, tried to suppress the madness. He arrested Dionysus, scoffed at the wild rites, and sought to spy on the women of the hills. But the god lured him into the woods dressed as a woman, and there, in a trance of divine madness, his own mother Agave led the maenads in tearing him limb from limb. Only when she returned to the city with her son's head on a theasus did the spell break. Dionysus was the god of theater as well as intoxication, of masks and performance. His festivals became the heart of Greek drama, where comedies and tragedies alike were performed in his honor. Through masks and songs, the Greeks gave shape to fears and desires they dared not speak aloud. With Dionysus came something new to the Greek world: mystery cults. Unlike the formal rites of Olympus, mystery cults promised something personal. In the Eleusinian mysteries, followers of Demeter and Persephone reenacted the story of descent and return, of a daughter lost to death and found again. The Orphics, followers of the poet-mystic Orpheus, spoke of Dionysus as a god torn apart and resurrected, whose suffering brought wisdom and whose rites promised freedom from the cycle of rebirth. These mysteries did not reject the Olympians, but they moved beneath them, quieter and deeper. They offered hope where the thundering gods gave only law. They whispered of a soul that could endure, that could transcend the mortal body. And in that promise, The old certainties began to tremble. The demigods, children of gods and mortals, the Olympians descended again and again into the world of men, in the form of lovers, tempters, warriors, or punishers. They mingled with mortals and left behind not just oracles or omens, but children. These children of gods and mortals, demigods, were born into a world that neither fully embraced them nor could ever fully contain them. Some became kings, others monsters, but a few became legends. Foremost was Heracles, son of Zeus and Alcmene, whose 12 labors we have already traced: the lion, the hydra, the hind, the boar, the stables, the birds, the bull, the mares, the girdle, the cattle, the apples, and Cerberus himself. Through them, Heracles became more than a hero. He became a symbol of mortal endurance, of pain redeemed through effort. He was the only mortal to join the pantheon, a god forged in agony. Yet Heracles was not the only one. Long before him came Perseus, son of Zeus and Danae, slayer of Medusa and rescuer of Andromeda. Theseus, son of Poseidon or Aegeus, slayer of the Minotaur in the labyrinth of Knossos, brought Athens into its first taste of empire. Bellerophon, rider of Pegasus, killed the Chimera, that fire-breathing horror of lion, goat, and serpent, but flew too high on the winged horse and fell. Atalanta, raised by bears and swift as the wind, sometimes called the daughter of Artemis herself, raced suitors and killed boars, but was undone by love and distraction. The demigods were never allowed peace. Their blood was too divine for comfort, too mortal for eternity. The gods watched them with pride and fear, for each one tested the boundary between Olympus and earth. Mortals worshipped them not just for their triumphs, but for their struggles. They suffered, bled, and sometimes died, but in doing so they became immortal in a way the gods never could through story. As the memory of Troy faded, as cities rose and fell, the tales of these children endured. They filled amphorae and temple friezes, echoed in poems and plays. And though the gods remained on Olympus, distant and growing more silent, it was in the lives of their mortal-born children that humanity found its mirrors, flawed, courageous, doomed, and glorious. Fate, oracles, and the limits of freedom, power, and Greek myth did not rest solely in the hands of gods or heroes. There was something older still, humming beneath every choice and every death fate. It was not a god, though the gods themselves feared it. It was not a law, though it governed even the divine. Fate was a truth, a force like gravity, unseen but inescapable, woven into the bones of the world. The Greeks called it Moira, and sometimes she had faces: the Moirai, the three sisters who spun, measured, and cut the thread of every life. Clotho spun the thread, Lachesis measured its length, and Atropos, the one who could not be turned, cut it when the time came. Even Zeus was bound by their decisions. He might thunder and plead, but if Atropos raised her shears, no power in heaven or earth could stay her hand. And so, if fate ruled all, what hope had man? The answer lay in omens and oracles, the strange, subtle language of the gods, and the signs sent to those who dared to read them. The Greeks did not believe they could change their fates, but they believed they might understand them. To see the future was to brace oneself against it. The most famous oracle in all of Greece was at Delphi, where Apollo spoke through the Pythia, a woman seated upon a tripod over a steaming chasm. She inhaled vapors, slipped into trance, and delivered the words of the god in riddles and fragments. Kings, generals, and common men came to her. But her words were never straightforward. Apollo did not deal in certainties. A prophecy, like a blade, could cut both ways. Croesus, king of Lydia, asked the oracle whether he should wage war on the Persians. She told him that if he crossed the river, he would destroy a great empire. He did not realize the empire would be his own. Oedipus, too, was told he would kill his father and marry his mother. His parents tried to thwart the prophecy by abandoning him. He in turn fled his supposed home to avoid fulfilling it, only to walk straight into its jaws. The oracle, as always, had been correct. It was men's misinterpretation that doomed them. There were other oracles, too. At Dodona, where the rustling of sacred oaks revealed the will of Zeus. At Delos, where Leto gave birth to Apollo and Artemis. At Aemon in Libya. In war, omens were sought before every battle: a flash of lightning, a flight of crows, a sneeze at the wrong moment. Sacrifices were made before sea voyages, births, weddings. The entrails of goats and the livers of oxen were studied by seers who divined the will of the gods in dark, wet patterns of muscle and blood. The art of reading omens became its own power. Seers like Calchas, who guided the Greeks at Troy, or Tiarges, the blind prophet of Thebes, touched by both male and female life, said to have lived 7 generations, held influence equal to kings. Their visions were sometimes a curse to those who asked for them. The Greeks understood that mortals were not in control. No matter how mighty the hero, how noble the bloodline, the wheel of fate turned ever on. Their stories were not about victory over destiny, but dignity within it. Hector knew he would die and still strapped on his armor. Achilles knew he would not return and still sailed to Troy. Oedipus sought to flee his doom and instead ran headlong into it. And the Pythia kept breathing year after year, whispering riddles in the smoke, her voice the cold breath of a world that had already decided what was to come. Hades and the underworld. To the ancient Greeks, death was not the end of the story, but merely the end of breath. What followed was neither heaven nor hell, but a realm both more neutral and more ancient, a land beneath the earth where all the dead, great and small, noble and villainous, made their final journey. This was Hades, named for the god who ruled it. Though it bore no flames, no pitchforks, no horned demons, it inspired a dread so deep that mortals seldom spoke the god's name aloud. They called him instead Plauton, the wealthy one, for all riches, all veins of silver and gold came from beneath the earth, and so too did the dead. The geography of the underworld was shaped not by logic but by myth and memory. At its threshold ran the 5 rivers Styx, the river of hatred and sacred oaths, Acron, the river of sorrow, Phlegethon of fire, Cocytus of lamentation, and Leth of forgetfulness. The dead arrived as shadows, Psyche, breathless and bloodless, and crossed into Hades with the help of Charon, the ferryman. For a coin, he would row them across Acron. Those without proper burial, those who could not pay, were left to wander the shores for 100 years, whispering and weeping. Beyond Charon waited Cerberus, the 3-headed hound who kept the dead in and the living out. Beyond stretched the plains of Asphodel, gray and dim, where most souls drifted in forgetful silence, murmuring like dry leaves. But not all fates were equal. The underworld had its judges, Minos Rhadamanthus and Aeacus, who weighed each soul. The truly wicked were cast into Taurus, a chasm of torment deeper than even the Titan's prison, where oath-breakers, murderers, and traitors suffered torments crafted to mirror their crimes. Sisyphus rolled his stone. Tantalus thirsted forever beside unreachable water. Ixion spun upon his fiery wheel. The rare few deemed worthy of reward passed to the Elysian fields, a paradise of soft winds and perpetual spring, where heroes might linger in comfort. Still fewer souls might choose to be reborn, passing through Leth to forget their past lives. At the heart of this realm stood Hades, stern and silent, a king without vanity. He did not seek worship, did not interfere in the affairs of mortals. He simply ruled, and he ruled absolutely. He was not evil as later myths would paint him, but immovable, indifferent, the shadow cast by Zeus's storm and Poseidon's tide. By his side stood Persephone, queen of the underworld, whose story reveals the strange duality of death in Greek thought. Persephone was the daughter of Demeter. One spring day, as she gathered flowers, the earth split open and Hades rose in his chariot. He took her down into his realm. Demeter, in her grief, let the earth wither. Crops failed. Famine swept across the land. Zeus at last sent Hermes to retrieve Persephone, but because she had eaten pomegranate seeds, she was bound to Hades. The compromise became the myth of the seasons. Persephone would spend part of the year in the underworld, and during those months Demeter would grieve and the world would grow cold. When Persephone returned, the earth would bloom. Life and death became a cycle, not a sentence. A few mortals journeyed there and lived to tell of it. Orpheus sang his way past Cerberus and charmed Hades and Persephone, only to lose Eurydice with a backward glance. Heracles brought Cerberus to the surface. Odysseus, guided by Circe, sacrificed to the dead and called up the ghosts of Tiresias, Achilles, Agamemnon. Each one told him that death was not glorious, only final. Better to be a slave in life than a king among shades, said Achilles, once the greatest of the Greeks. And so the Greeks built their tombs with care. They buried the dead with coins for Charon, with weapons, wine, and songs. They poured libations and made offerings at the family hearth, for the dead were never truly gone. In the stillness of Hades, the Greeks saw the shape of eternity. They gave death its place in the order of the cosmos, not as a punishment, but as a passage. The twilight of the gods, Rome and Christianity, even the gods are not immortal, not in memory, not in power, not in reverence. There comes a moment in every mythic cycle where the divine grows quiet, where once vivid figures fade from the edges of men's dreams, and thrones once built in thunder are worn smooth by time. For the gods of Olympus, that slow retreat began not with war or prophecy, but with Rome, and with a world that had grown restless under the weight of old stories. The Romans did not destroy the Greek gods. They adopted them, gave them new names, folded their myths into Roman values and Roman conquest. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera became Juno, Poseidon became Neptune. Rome admired the grandeur of Olympus, but it reshaped the gods to better reflect its ideals: order, hierarchy, empire. Jupiter thundered not from a wild peak, but from the Capitoline hill, dressed in the robes of the lawgiver. The wildness of Dionysus became the cultured Bacchus, and Athena's fierce independence softened in the civic wisdom of Minerva. In literature, the myths lived on. Ovid, in his Metamorphoses, retold the old tales in golden Latin, often with irony, always with poetic grace. Virgil in the Aeneid made the gods instruments of fate, pulling strings behind Rome's founding. But something had shifted. In Homer, the gods strode the battlefield naked in their passions. In Roman myth, they had become symbolic, distant, politicized. They no longer intervened as freely. They had become themes more than presences. As the empire expanded, so did its encounters with new gods and ideas. From the east came Mithras, a deity born from stone, slayer of cosmic bulls. From Egypt came Isis, mother of magic and life. From Judea came a single invisible god, one life, who forbade images, scorned idols, and made no room for divine siblings or thunder-wielding kings. These new cults did not simply compete with the Olympians, they undermined the entire architecture of Greek belief. Where the old gods ruled by appetite and hierarchy, these new faiths offered moral clarity, unity, and salvation. At the same time, philosophy began to erode the mythic world from within. Thinkers like Xenophanes had long mocked the idea of gods shaped in the image of men, arguing that if oxen had gods, they too would look bovine. Plato admired the beauty of myth, but cast doubt on its literal truth, suggesting the gods must be perfect and good, not the jealous, lustful figures who bickered on Olympus. Epicurus declared that the gods existed, but took no interest in human affairs, and that fear of divine punishment was a superstition to be cast off. Even Stoicism, with its stern ethical code, saw divinity not in figures, but in reason itself, the logos that governed all. By the time the imperial cult arose, when emperors were declared divine and altars were built to mortal men, the line between myth and politics had frayed entirely. The gods of old became symbols. Their temples were kept more for tradition than belief. Farmers still left offerings to Demeter, sailors still prayed to Poseidon, but fewer truly believed the gods walked among them. The flame on Olympus had not yet gone out, but it flickered low. And then came the final blow, not from a rival cult, but from a revolution of faith. Christianity, once a fringe sect of persecuted believers, began to spread across the empire, carried not by sword but by word. Its God was unseen, singular, and omnipotent. Its stories were not of lovers and vengeance, but of sin and salvation. In time, its temples replaced the old ones. Its hymns drowned out the liars. Its priests used the Olympians as demons or fiction. By the reign of Theodosius I, pagan temples were closed by law, the Olympic Games abolished, and the rites of sacrifice outlawed. The gods did not resist. There was no final war between Zeus and Christ. The Olympians simply faded like the last light of a long day. Their statues stood weathered and silent, their altars went cold, the marble columns cracked, and ivy crept up where priests once stood. The myths remained, but as literature, not faith. Children learned of Heracles in schools, not shrines. Artists painted Athena, but did not pray to her. The gods who had once commanded storms and fates were now stories, beautiful, strange, haunting. The return of the gods, myth in the modern mind, and yet they endured. Even as their temples crumbled, they lived on in whispers, in poetry, in the architecture of Western imagination. During the long centuries of Christian dominance, the gods were not worshipped, but neither were they forgotten. Monks and scholars copied ancient texts, sometimes grudgingly preserving Homer and Hesiod, Euripides, and Sophocles, even as they condemned the beliefs these works once sustained. The old stories survived not in temples, but in libraries, tucked between sermons and treatises, waiting. Then came the Renaissance, that great turning of the wheel, when Europe looked backward to move forward. In the courts of Florence, in the chapels of Rome, in the minds of thinkers like Petrarch and Erasmus, the gods rose again, not as deities, but as symbols of human nature. Painters draped Aphrodite in seashells and light. Sculptors gave Apollo his bow and grace. Poets invoked the muse once more. Myth was reborn in marble and canvas, not altar and incense. The gods no longer ruled the sky, but they reigned in art. In the Age of Enlightenment, reason challenged superstition, and yet the myths endured. They were studied, translated, dissected. To Voltaire, they were allegories. To Goethe, they were mirrors of the soul. Romanticism followed, and with it a return to the emotional, the tragic, the sublime. Writers looked to Oedipus and Antigone, to Orpheus and Eurydice, and found in them eternal questions. What is fate? What is love? What does it mean to be human? Then came the modern age. Myth was no longer confined to classical study. It appeared in literature, cinema, psychology, even comics. Carl Jung saw the gods as archetypes within the human mind, eternally ing. James Joyce wove them into Dublin's streets. Rick Riordan reimagined them for school children in Manhattan. In Marvel and DC, the gods walked again, not in robes and sandals, but in armor and spandex. And always in the background, there remained the old tales, unchanged. Odysseus still sailed. Heracles still labored. Persephone still rose each spring. Because myth is not fixed. It is living memory, shaped by those who carry it. What the Greeks gave us was not just a pantheon, but a framework, a way to explain the world, to wrestle with death, to honor beauty, to understand the self. Their gods were flawed, Yes, but gloriously so. In them we saw not perfection, but potential, the agony of choice, the thrill of risk, the pain of hubris, the comfort of ritual. They told us what we might become and what we must fear. Even now, in a world of science and silence, the myths still murmur. You hear them in stories of chosen heroes, in fallen stars, in the slow turn of the seasons. A girl descends and spring waits, defies prophecy and loses everything. A mother grieves, the son. The faces change, but the truths do not. The gods may have left Olympus, but they never truly left us. They walk quietly now in books and songs, in dreams and memories, in every tale that dares to reach beyond the mortal veil. They are not dead. They have simply moved. And now the story ends. The winds on Mount Olympus are cold. The torches in Delphi are ash. But the myths remain. Good night.